You hear the name Bob Dylan, and you know it. The voice is unmistakable. But the man himself, he's always been a moving target. Folk hero, rock rebel, Nobel laureate. He's worn pretty much every label you can think of, and then he's thrown each one away. So this isn't just the story of a musician. It's the story of a cultural giant whose entire career is a masterclass in one powerful idea: constant reinvention. So before we even get into the how he did it, let's just take a second to appreciate the what. We're talking over 125 million records sold. That number alone puts him in the absolute top tier of musicians ever. But really, his true impact isn't something you can measure in sales. It's measured in influence and the sheer weight of his awards. And just look at this list. I mean, it's not just the Grammys or the Oscar, which are huge, right? But he's got the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That's America's highest civilian honor. And then, in a move that nobody saw coming, he wins the Nobel Prize in Literature for his new poetic expressions. This just proves we're not talking about just another musician. The entire world recognized him as this massive cultural force. Okay, so how does someone become a force like that? Well, to really get a handle on this whole reinvention thing, we have to start with the very first person he invented, himself. See, Bob Dylan wasn't born Bob Dylan. His very first creation was the persona of Bob Dylan. He was born Robert Allen Zimmerman, way up in Hibbing, Minnesota. But when he hit the scene in Greenwich Village back in '61, he started to change. And a year later, he made it official, legally changing his name. This wasn't just a stage name, you know. This was the first move in a lifetime of reinventions. And he explained his thinking on this years later, back in 2004. He basically said, you're born, the wrong names, wrong parents. I mean, that happens. You call yourself what you want to call yourself. This is the land of the free. I mean, think about that. It's this really radical idea of self-determination. He saw his own past as something he could just shed and reshape. And that idea right there, that's the key to understanding everything that came next. And that self-creation, that new persona, it pretty quickly morphed into his first huge public identity, the one that just took the world by storm. The folk prophet, the voice of a generation. Yeah, this is the image, right? This is the one that defined a whole era. Just a kid, really, with a guitar and a harmonica. But the songs he was singing, my gosh, they carried the weight of an entire generation that was dealing with war, injustice, and just massive social upheaval. And the songs? Wow, we're talking about Blowin' in the Wind and The Times They Are Changing. These weren't just pop songs. They became the actual anthems for the civil rights and anti-war movements. He had songs like Only a Pawn in Their Game, which just broke down the murder of activist Medgar Evers with this incredible clarity. See, he wasn't just singing tunes. He was writing history in real time. Exactly like critic Janet Moslin said, he was crowned the voice of his generation, and he had this incredible moral authority that came with it. But here's the question. What happens when that voice, the one an entire movement is depending on, decides to completely change its tune? Well, that brings us to maybe the most famous or infamous reinvention of his whole career. The moment he plugged in an electric guitar and the entire folk world felt like he'd stabbed them in the back. And you can just see the shock right here on the slide. Look at that. On the left, you've got the earnest folk singer from 1963. And on the right, just a couple years later, he's this confrontational rock star in sunglasses. He literally traded his acoustic for a Fender Strat. And believe me, this change wasn't just about the music. It was a complete overhaul of his entire identity. So yeah, his followers had put him on this pedestal. He was their acoustic prophet. So what did they do when he decided he wanted to be something completely different? The reaction was not good. It was immediate and it was angry. At the 1965 Newport Folk Festival, this is the very heart of the movement that built him up. His electric set was just met with this wall of boos. To them, his core fans, it felt like a total betrayal. And that feeling, that sense of betrayal, it all came to a head a year later. It's 1966, a concert in Manchester, England. In between songs, some guy in the audience, just furious about this new electric sound, yells out the single most damning thing you could call a perceived traitor: Judas. But Dylan's response was just as legendary as the insult. He leans into the mic and shoots back, "I don't believe you. You're a liar." And then he turns to his band and says, famously, "Play it fucking loud." That was it. That was the definitive break. He was flat out refusing to be the artist people wanted him to be and choosing to be the artist he needed to become. So all that pressure, the constant touring, the controversy, the weight of being the voice of a generation, it all led to his next reinvention, just disappearing. And just look at how fast all of this went down. In the span of a single year, he goes from that Newport controversy to the Judas concert. Then, just 2 months after that, he has a pretty serious motorcycle crash near his home in Woodstock. And that crash, it became this clean break in his career. It let him just retreat from the world and start recording a ton of new, totally different music in private. But as Dylan himself admitted later, that crash was more than just a random accident. It was an opportunity. He actually said, "Truth was that I wanted to get out of the rat race." It was his escape hatch, his way out from under all that crushing pressure. So what came out of this great escape? Well, yet another complete reinvention, of course. He didn't tour for almost 8 years. And when he did come back with albums like Nashville Skyline, it was another huge shock to the system. He traded in all that complicated, surreal rock poetry for these simple, direct country songs. And he was singing them in a totally new, mellow voice. It was just as radical a turn as going electric had been a few years earlier. And that brings us to the final chapter, which, in classic Dylan style, is a story that doesn't really have an end, because it turns out his true identity isn't folk singer or rock star or country crooner. His true identity is the act of changing itself. And it's wild, because even the way we see his work reinvents itself over time. Take his album Blood on the Tracks from 1975. When it came out, Rolling Stone magazine basically called its production shoddy. But today, so many critics call it his one flawless album. It's like he was so far ahead of his time that it took the rest of the world years just to catch up to what he was doing. And this whole idea of him being in constant motion, it's perfectly summed up by his late career phase. Since 1988, he's been on what everyone calls the never-ending tour. I mean, he plays dozens and dozens of shows every single year. He's always on the move, always reworking his classic songs, refusing to let them become these dusty old museum pieces. So it all comes down to this, right? By constantly changing, was he a Judas who betrayed the very audience that made him famous? Or did he do something much bigger? Did he completely redefine what it means to be an artist, basically giving every single artist who came after him permission to grow, to change, and to follow their own path, no matter what anyone else thinks? And that right there might just be his most profound legacy of all.